Good afternoon, friends. Sorry if my voice is a little raspy at the moment. I'll try to recover from that. We are on the 6 Stages of Discipleship video commentary. S, X, S, D, V, C. That is the abbreviation. Now, this is program 18, and unfortunately, I had to skip a day yesterday. You know, it's always somehow for me a great pleasure to be able to continue offering these commentaries on what Master DK has said. Now, obviously, the most important part of the commentaries is the fact that I am actually reading word for word what Master DK said. But occasionally, there's this line of light which can go forth from a point which he has made and can bring in a consideration that helps to round out the subject in which we are dealing, or at least show some of its relationships. Because as you know, and I've often said, everything that Master DK has written is like a great sphere of knowledge, and you can get, you can arrive at anywhere from any point. And that's so interesting to see how you might arrive at a different point from what he has said. So this will lead us one day towards what I guess I would call local omniscience. Planetary, solar systemic, and cosmic in the local sense. I mean, one day, of course, the full omniscience will again be ours, tiny little emanations that we are. And this, the full omniscience, is already ours on a much, much, much higher turn of the spiral. In other words, part of us, the most essential part, exists already at that point of universal self-cognition. And at the same time, we are an emanation, a tiny, reduced self-perception of this particular universal logos, and finally of all universal logoi that have ever been and will be. So not only have we been around a long time, we've been around forever. No matter how far back you go, the essential we, the essential us, well, we are there. And that's something so maybe difficult to bring into the understanding. I know I seem to forget it all the time, and I have to remind myself that the essence of what I am is a foreverness of being, and even I would call it a supra-universal being. But then, in a way, that's the subject of another one of these sort of study group meditation programs that I offer on Zoom. So I don't want to get too far into it because we're dealing with something quite specific. And coming from an amazingly knowledgeable individual. I don't think that we appreciate, I'll make a guess, how much Master DK really knows and how he has to choose what he gives us. So it is the most important thing he can give us because he can't possibly give us everything because time, space, and our limitations, and also even the limitations of his amanuensis would prohibit giving more. And he would need also permission for what he gives. And when permission is granted from points of tension above himself, considering himself also as an emanation, then he can offer, as sometimes he has over the course of those 30 years he worked with Alice Bailey. He will announce or tell that I now have permission to offer this consideration in addition to what I've given before. So let us rejoice in what his sacrifice has meant to us. And of course, the sacrifice of that intrepid disciple, Alice Bailey, who was his most recent amanuensis, how he worked with HPB, maybe is not so well known, but he did work with her. And how he will work in the immediate future, 4 years ahead, beginning approximately. That's not really known to us. But there are so many things to be known and accessible to us that we cannot complain about what we don't know. Now, you know, in terms of the segue here, a couple of things being said. Eventually, when the disciple's vibration is constant, maybe there's not so many of us who have that, and responsive to the higher one, higher vibration, the two can then be synchronized. It is this synchronization which characterizes all grades of initiates, and which indicates to an initiate of higher degree that an initiate or disciple of lower grade can be admitted into the higher ranks. In a way, to put it crudely, it means same timeness. But I would also say there is some qualitative measure. So very synchronization, using the word loosely, of values is also very important. And then, of course, it just hits you to ponder this revelatory phrase. Synchronization is the key to initiation. And since there are other keys as well, perhaps the method to achieve synchronization is indicated when you start gathering the other necessities which lead to initiation. Remember, every true disciple is being prepared for an initiation. And it helps a lot if that disciple has a pretty clear idea, backed by reasoning and even by intuition, as to what that initiation may be and what he or she still has to develop in order to take that initiation. Just pause for a moment. And think about the initiation ahead of you. Think realistically and try to understand why that is, in all probability, the initiation before you. And what that initiation will bring to your life that presently is not demonstrating. In all these matters, we want to be as truthful with ourselves as we possibly can be. I mean, we can make mistakes, of course. It's not that, but exaggeration or minimization under the influence of Kamamanus does not really, excuse me, does not really net the disciple any improvement. The work needs you. That's what DK basically said a little while ago. Serve the plan and forget yourself, serve the plan. The work needs you. Now, when you really can think in those terms and not just about what you will receive by association with higher points of tension, higher entities, then you're on your way. And some of these simplest things, apparently simple, are some of the hardest really to achieve. Forget yourself. Easily said. Serve the plan with love and intelligence and a willingness to give up many conventional things, possessions, comforts. The work needs you. Not to exaggerate your importance or my importance. But if we can, wake up every day and remind ourselves that the work needs us, it will be a different result. Now here, the fourth stage, and we're in part 7 of this third section of discipleship in the New Age, Volume 1. Remembering, of course, that DK said, use that book to draw people into the ashrams where they really can be trained and have their service value much increased. Chela on the thread. We've passed through little Chela-ship around the time of the first initiation, Chela in the light, with 2 disciples involved, one working to be ever more in the light, and the other higher guiding the one who is so working, and accepted discipleship, where the master creates a real link with the Chela. And I think this link is known for its indissolubility. I mean, unless there's something extreme. But the Chela can sort of quit or rebel or whatever, but the Chela may throw himself out of work that is being accomplished at that time, but does not throw himself out of association in a deep way with the master. So pretty much once you're in, you're in. And it is for us a great objective. Now, with these preliminary remarks, I assume on the stages of, on unaccepted discipleship, let us pass on to another of the stages on the path of discipleship. The fourth stage is described as follows. The stage wherein the disciple is taught how in emergencies, and I suppose those apply far more to the work than personal emergencies, how to attract the master's attention. This has the peculiar name of the Chela on the thread, in emergencies. So, we'll see here what Master DK considers an emergency to be. And I guess he's not going to tell us exactly how to do this, but I suspect from what I've studied and what I've heard that the Ajna Center may well be involved. It's a question of passing through this stage with discretion, because you can't have a responsible disciple importuning the master constantly. It would be like a child with a mother or father. The child is not very worried about what the mother or father may be doing at the moment. It might be important, but the child has needs and demands through crying, crying out for the attention of the parent. Well, there are some restrictions here, I would say. The whole question of psychic sensitivity of the higher kind is involved at this stage. Now, there's a lot of solar plexus sensitivity that is psychic, but I don't think we're going to be talking about that so much. Because I'm remembering that there was a very intellectual Chela of the Tibetan, and actually he's the very first person dealt with in the book, because his name ended with an A, Adams. And DK was training him for psychic sensitivity, since he was pretty worn out doing the normal types of meditation. He was suffering from brain fatigue. So DK wisely gave him the training. But I think his Ajna Center, which was involved in this training, was only 15% open. It's not very much, and he needed that for the kind of psychic sensitivity DK was attempting to instill in him. His solar plexus was quite open, 60%. He had a lot of sixth ray, and I don't know, the percentages are there in the very first instruction. I don't want to misquote, but this Ajna Center needed attention. I have taught, says DK, in my writings most clearly and definitely the undesirability of the lower psychic experiences. Although the truly trained Chela has not to be afraid of going anywhere. But of course, one doesn't want to give in to the usual glamours that are found in connection with lower psychic experiences. This has been done, his message about the undesirability, this has been done as the need to warn aspirants anent this matter is great. He does use the word aspirant, which implies, in some sense, the emotional connection. The difficulty is enhanced by the fact that lower psychics are not easily reached. They take pride in their psychism, not easily reached and warned, as they are ever determined that their clairvoyant and clairaudient powers are indicative of the advanced type of high spiritual attainment. Their minds are closed to all warnings, and they function often behind a barrier of smug satisfaction, smug self-satisfaction. They forget, and maybe never knew, they forget that the aboriginal races, and even animals here, animals are all psychic and register that which the more mental types fail to record. So this is kind of putting smugness in place, because people do, after all, get into something that maybe for quite a long time they have not indulged, and it looks new to them. And so they're very eager to cultivate something which is very ancient and belonging to types who have nowhere near really reached their particular real status. Nevertheless, thus they do. They forget that the Aboriginal races, who should we look to, you know, for these, the Bushmen maybe, and the Australian Aboriginals and the Ainus of Japan. Suffice it to say, those who are not yet as far along the path, and even animals, are all psychic and register that which the more mental types fail to record. The rank and file of people who are inherently astral in their activities, their interpretations of phenomena, and their attitude and focus. I better read that again because my emphasis was incorrect. The rank and file of the people are inherently astral in their activities, their interpretations of phenomena, and their attitudes and focus. It is necessary then to enforce the warnings and awaken the average psychic to the undesirability of his astral life. It's hard when you're attached to something that you think makes you a little unique, a little ahead of others, a little more knowing than others are. It's that inherent and really useless, even stupid competition between human beings. The attempt to gain some kind of superiority for the little self. So this is how it is. And I'll use a blue color because that's one of the colors of the sixth ray. And when people, well, the rank and file of people have a lot of sixth ray. It's been useful, but it is not climactic in its revelatory possibilities if one simply sticks to one's rather rigid devotions. Even, the devotion to the astral life. And I see I failed to do that one, and I will do it. So we have a lot to learn about what is high and what is past, and in which we indulged during the Atlantean period, when the great majority of us certainly were incarnated on this particular globe, in this particular chain. There are some other visitors that maybe came in Aryan times and so forth, but pretty much you could say to yourself, I was there in Atlantis. And many things have been forgotten, but in the fantasies and cartoons and comic books and some of this kind of illustrated writing that is meant to be entertaining and fantastical, vestiges of our own old Atlantean experience comes forth. DK said, look, a lot of things were committed in Atlantis, and because of them, some of the very heavy karmic situations in Aryan times have emerged because of those old committings, we might say. I guess it's a good thing we don't remember them much or all, because they might really be, at this time, overwhelming temporarily, while we are trying to cultivate something beyond Kamlamanis. We're trying to cultivate a pure form of thought, which can observe with accuracy and in a corrective manner our glamorous emotional reactions. But now he goes on to talk about what the true disciple does. Disciples, however, put no aspect of divine manifestation outside their range of experience. So I guess that's what I was trying to say just a little earlier. They know that psychism in its lowest phases is a part of the divine expression and is of an essentially higher nature than the purely physical processes of living in a body. Really, it's the second stage of focus in the developing personality. At first, man has a lot to take care of just in terms of his physical vital life. And that's where his focus is. And in the first petal of the egoic lotus, which I think takes a very long time to open, relatively, his focus is on that vital physical living. But then comes later the second petal and the astral focus. So again, DK here is working against the potential narrowness of some disciplic thought. A disciple, he says, cannot say that now, because he is a disciple, he will not be subject to this, that, or the other experience. This is really important. We have to be able to go anywhere. We may be called to go anywhere and to serve anywhere. If we are serving upon the vital physical plane, what we call our normal real world, well, we can certainly serve within the realm of glamour. And we can serve amidst the rigidities of the concrete mind. So we can't say, oh, being a disciple saves me from this. It's just that our attitude is different and we have a deeper understanding of where we are serving and why we are serving, and we don't get captivated by the particular type of phenomena in the arena in which we are serving. In other words, we can serve within the realm of glamour, but we don't get, ideally, overcome by it. There is always the danger that if a disciple is not rather glamour, they could be, he or she could be taken in by the phenomena, plural, which they seek to weaken and dissipate and banish. So let us avoid that separative attitude, like I'm too good to go there anymore. The disciple, he has to be prepared for all experiences and to face the fact that eventually all disciples have to become psychics, both higher and lower, but of course, the lower under a degree of scientific control. All have to become psychics. I mean, Neptune is right up there as a planetary chain, or rather scheme, of real importance, as was the Christ. Well, the Christ could go anywhere and did. And when you think about Christ's consciousness and the kinds of people he had to deal with, and how he descended, what did he do? He talked to publicans and sinners, whereas the usual Pharisee would say, oh, I'm too good to associate with those people. But Christ knew through identification that we're all of the same essence. And he was able to get beyond the outer appearance, though, of course, he corrected that outer appearance, but he didn't have less love for the sinner. Just imagine how we all looked to the Christ. As sinners, for sure, compared to the high state that he had reached. But then again, we cannot take away from the Christ the fact that he too once committed sin. I don't mean just one time, I mean in general. Because as the Tibetan has said, all have sinned, my brother, all have sinned. And there are many people who will fight the humanity of the Christ, or fight against the recognition that he too evolved. They want him to be some glorious God king who is very different from us normal human beings. At least some of the ignorant want that to be the case. But it's not so. Christ knew what was in man because he had been there himself and had agonized his way to the goal as second-rate souls are wont to do. So we have to fulfill that Neptune when it comes to looking at the solar systemic schemes. Neptune is very important. It's the planet of psychism. And it's right up there at the top. It's mysterious because in one way, maybe it doesn't belong to our solar system, and in another way it does, and is very influential. And certainly it's not fully developed yet, the way some of the lower planetary schemes are, representing lower chakras, which develop first. The only safeguard for which he, the disciple, works is to prevent the lower powers demonstrating until the higher psychic faculties are functioning, and then the lower are controlled and operated, if I might so express it, from the level of the higher consciousness. Now, this is really important. Don't get carried away and run away with lower psychism before you've been able to develop what is higher. which means when we're building the Antahkarana and we're accessing the monastic permanent atom, and we're invoking response in relation to the triad, then it's a lot more safe to reawaken lower psychic response if needed, because it can be controlled and directed and understood. Okay. There is, to the mind of the disciple, only life and form, and he is learning to handle the life processes through the medium of the form. It's got to be expressed right down here, where form, as we customarily regard it, does exist. And he's learning to handle the life processes through the medium of the form so as to produce a divine manifestation. Now that's the whole theme there, that we will somehow manifest divinity, manifest the divine plan, and we will not let the elemental life with which we are so familiar get in the way of that manifestation of what higher beings deem correct to manifest. We can't do all that they can do, but we can help bring through their intentions. So these words of until the higher psychic faculties are functioning are important words. You have to, think how very cautious Master DK is in teaching us, guiding us, so we don't get swept away by glamorous teachings, so often littering the bookshelves of bookstores and now other modes of communication. The discrimination between what is glamorous, illusory, and what is not really has to be developed by us. And maybe the use of that faculty on the third level of the mental plane, that faculty which is called spiritual discernment, is very important, because then we can discern somehow, pick out of a mass of confusing detail what is really leading us forward on the path, and what is just some flattering piece of nonsense that people read because it makes them feel good, It's so interesting, isn't it, that Master DK says, look, if a master is going to talk to you, he doesn't have a whole lot of time. He's going to say a few things, and they are along the corrective line. They are terse, They are to the point, and they carry no flattery at all. There may come moments of commendation, but only with a purpose. If a teacher like Master DK thinks that a well-timed or placed commendation is good for the work, for the group as a whole, and for the work. But if one hopes that the real master will, as if imitate the thought form, that particular thought form of the master, which offered good words of mediocre cheer, strange phrase, good words of mediocre cheer, that's not going to happen. So much humility is required of us, and a sense of proportion opens the door to humility. And then when we stop thinking so highly of ourselves and become less self-concerned, and in some cases self-obsessed, then we will begin to make real progress. So going on to what the master is saying here, the world today is entering a phase of extreme sensitivity. Disciples must train themselves to help. The shift of the consciousness of ordinary and mediocre individuals will be on to levels of astralism, conscious astralism. And the veil between the seen and the unseen will rapidly disappear. So let's say, again, extreme sensitivity. And we're told in the book of Revelation that there will be I'm going to miss the exact wording, but that hell will precipitate on earth. Well, we're talking about lower planes on the astral plane, with which the true aspirant or disciple is to have nothing to do, and there's to be nothing of that type of material in his astral body. But then again, things are wearing thin, and already there are precipitations going on all the time, and some of them are very destructive. I'm remembering here a few years ago, a Swedish dignitary, I think, an important governmental minister, was just murdered while shopping. She was in some kind of department store, and some unstable individual for whom the boundary between lower astral and the consciousness was worn away, probably through misuse of certain energies, heard a voice that just said, "Kill her." Well, He picked up a knife, and that's exactly what he did. So a lot of low stuff might come through. Of course, at the same time, when the etheric web is no longer so thick, good things can come through as well. But there are many weak-minded people who, when they hear a voice, and the voice tells them to do this or that, they do it. And they don't use their own mind to stand back and discern what might be the nature of this voice, what might be the nature of the act which I am required to do. They haven't built the Antahkarana, not yet. And you have to kind of do that in order to discriminate and to discern. We just can't be an open house and entertain whoever wants to come inside. We'll just have a house full of devils, just the way the man in the parable did. So going on, how can disciples be of service in that difficult period of growing sensitivity to both what is bad and what is good, if they have no experience in the distinction and interpretation which must exist between aspects of phenomena? Well, it's a good question. If you just stay away from that because now you're a disciple, so you don't have to bother with that anymore, you can't really go there and be of any use to someone who's in trouble on those levels. So a lot of courage is needed by the disciple. What did he say? I could wish you were all younger. I guess having fewer aches and pains and more vitality and more courageous. It doesn't mean stepping out on a battlefield filled with conventional weapons. The courage he's talking about is something that helps people face the truth without disguise and to abstract themselves from glamour and illusion, even though they offer, those two offer certain comforts to the unliberated soul in incarnation. So how can disciples be of service in that difficult period if they have no experience in the distinction and interpretation which must exist between aspects of phenomena? How can they rescue and safeguard others if they fear to enter into realms of life where the lower psychism rules? I was thinking about Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's writing. He was a kind of a Capricorn Leo type. obviously a fantasist, but when he talks about Middle Earth, where so much of this is going on, so much of the plot of his stories, I can't help but thinking we're talking about the astral plane, which is middle between the outer surface plane and the mental plane. Strikes me that that is what we were dealing with. And as you could see, if you read those books or maybe looked at the recent epic filmmaking about them, there were plenty of scary things going on in Middle Earth. So how can they rescue and safeguard others if they fear to enter into realms where the lower psychism rules? I am not asking you to cultivate psychic powers, although, maybe a few he asks, certainly one. But I do ask you to hold yourselves in guarded readiness to see and hear on all levels of service, and to know what you see and hear, interpreting it correctly, unblinded by prejudice and fear. And this is, I've quoted this, the path of discipleship is not an easy one, but its compensations are adequate. And of course, that's a little bit of the dry humor that we are used to regarding in the works of Master DK. I'm not asking you to cultivate psychic powers, he says, but I do ask you to hold yourselves in guarded readiness without rejection and saying, oh, I'm above that, and so forth. And because he calls these, interestingly, not just levels of experience, levels of phenomena, but levels of service. Service. That's how we think of it. Okay. We think of the service aspect and not, and not the perhaps unpleasant, phenomenal aspect. We are reframing our attitude towards the various planes. He says, don't have substance of the 6th and 7th subplane of the astral plane in your body. Okay, it's unfitting for a disciple, but it doesn't mean you can't go there. And it doesn't mean that you can't help those who are rather trapped there. I sometimes wonder what it means that Christ, while in the tomb, of course, it was really Master Jesus, but Christ had to have been participating, spent some of that period in the harrowing of hell. Well, what is hell? Sometimes DK says the only true hell that there is the etheric physical plane, the world of normal phenomena, but perhaps other things qualify as hell as well. Christians have often been asked, why should those who lived at a time when it was impossible to hear of Christianity because it had not been developed nor had its exemplar appear, why should they be sent to hell? Because they didn't believe. It's a question that any reasonable person can draw certain conclusions from, that obviously such people were not sent to hell because they could not believe. They had no chance to believe. But they could serve, and they did in various ways of great importance to the foundation of Christianity, let us say. So to see and hear on all levels of, not phenomena, yes, phenomena, but service. And do we have that attitude no matter in what state of consciousness we may be, that state is a level of service? We stop thinking about ourselves and just try to help wherever we may be. So in this fourth stage, psychic sensitivity is involved. Psychic sensitivity for the Chela on the thread. And considering that the Ajna Center is involved with the higher form of psychic sensitivity, then we have to learn somehow the connection of the thread to the Ajna Center. In your thoughts, the Tibetan goes on to say, as you endeavor very briefly to study this stage, there must exist a correlation, a co-relation between the Tibetan, the ashram in which he is working, and the master. This is a requirement that there be a correlation. Between the Chela, the ashram as a whole, because it seems that he is now, having been an accepted disciple, working within the ashram. It says in which he is working, and also the master. This correlation and its growth and the growth of this triangular relationship is always brought about through a realization of tension. Tension, focused, immovable will. It's a new and higher relation to the master. There has been much given to students about the theme of the thread, the sutratma and the Antahkarana. The life thread, sutratma, and the advancing consciousness thread to be considered as the Antahkarana. This thread leads from the hierarchy and a point of tension in that hierarchy, such as the master at the center of any ashram and the Christ at the very center of the hierarchy. And a point of tension in that hierarchy to distant places, to many planes, and into many hearts. This thread enables the disciple, if he has been permitted to learn how to use it, to return instantaneously to his center of work and to reach out at any desired moment, or to reach at any desired moment, the master in his life. Then he's going to depict for us how this might look. It would be a very big responsibility, even bigger than the responsibility of accepted disciple. Well, here's the diagram. The master, the soul, the ashram, the disciple. He puts in the soul of the group, I suppose, and the soul of the ashram and the soul of the disciple, all of these really being somehow essentially one thing. Yeah. So he doesn't give a lot concerning this stage, but a certain triangular relationship is fundamental to it. Now we begin to think also about that triangle in the head, or just outside the head of the major head center, the ajna center, and the alta major center, and how that brings about for every disciple who has achieved that rotation a true healing, dispelling radiance. And it also is a necessity for the third degree. Well, what is our relation to this triangle? We are, let us say, optimistically, the disciple. Okay. Now he'll go further, as there is always the possible analogy. An extension of this idea lies behind much that I have taught, anent the Wesak festival, and should be in your minds when you prepare to participate in it. And is it? Is it? Okay, let's see what the extension might be. Shambhala and the Buddha and the Christ, the hierarchy as the soul, and humanity taking the place of the Chela. Shambhala is equivalent to the master. It looks like the Buddha and the ashram. Well, the ashram, I think, particularly related to the Christ, is the Buddha the soul of this? The hierarchy, well, let's say there's more here below. There are 5 points. And inevitably at the Wesak festival, both the Buddha and the Christ are co-participants. Then the entire hierarchy that attends the festival is involved. Whoop, don't want to go too far. Want to keep that alignment. Just like here, I want to keep the alignment. Now here, the alignment is a little different. The co-participants are the soul and the ashram, just like the Buddha and the Christ, and the master lines up with the disciple. There are 4 points, it appears. 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah. I think I'm correct. Here there are 5 points. The co-participants, the Buddha representing Shambhala, the Christ representing hierarchy, which is the ashram of the Lord of Shambhala, and then to the aspiring one, the lowest one in this particular alignment. Okay. So always look at these high moments. We are contacting points of tension, i.e. sources, i.e. entities far beyond our present state. And a little bit of what they are can, with full elements, I would say, of surprise, come through to us. The entire subject of the Chela on the thread and the techniques involved in this state of consciousness, notice we need to be instructed in certain techniques, are all related to the capacity of the human being under the soul, under soul control. Well, we can tell that's not an early stage of discipleship, to be the magnetic and to emit the vibratory call, which can penetrate to the ear of the one who holds the thread. Now, maybe we don't imagine that the thread contacting the disciple is somehow being held in the hand of the master. As I say, it seems to me it will connect with an aspect of the master's being. And I wonder about the ajna center in this. I don't make any claims about that. I just wonder. So the capacity of the human being, who is by this occasion under soul control, to be magnetic. That's another thing that happens when the triangle surrounding the head is activated. To be magnetic and to emit the vibratory call, vibration and a call, a state of vibration perhaps, that can penetrate to the ear. Again, I don't think it's literal. It's a sensitivity in the one who holds the thread. Penetrate to the ear of the one who holds the thread. This is quoted from a very ancient manuscript in the archives of the hierarchy. Don't you well, maybe we wouldn't know what to do with it, but I was going to say, don't you wish you had DK's library card? In the old days, you didn't take out books from a library unless you had a library card. Well, obviously, the tremendous scholar that he is, he can penetrate into these places where very advanced and ancient sources of illumination can be found. This is quoted from a very ancient manuscript in the archives of the hierarchy dealing with this stage of discipleship. Yeah. I am, for the first time, making this information available in a brief and necessarily veiled and inadequate form to the disciples assembling this cycle at the call of the hierarchy. We are being, as it were, evoked. But DK is calling attention to the fact that this information is new, at least in terms of his presentations, and you can be quite sure, I think, in regard to other presentations, and unless they use a different language and we fail to recognize it, only those who are at this stage of discipleship will really comprehend what I say and profit by the hints. So we get a idea of triangular relationships, of alignments, of higher psychic development, and generally of the ability to call upon the master at any point, not necessarily for an interview, but at least when there is an emergency situation, and we look at the emergency as having to do with the work. You know, I might have a stomachache, but I'm not going to call on the master to fix that. I think Alice Bailey was somehow particularly heroic because she was undergoing some very heavy karma there at the end of her incarnation. And it was painful, I think, and daily or every other day, blood transfusions were required. But she wouldn't, even though DK, seeing her distress, offered to ameliorate it. We have learned that she just said, no, I will go through this. And in the first ray manner, I will take care of the karma that I have owing. Now, am I correct in thinking that she thought that the karma had something to do with the spilling of her own blood through some kind of, was it a suicidal event? I guess it's possible for disciples on the way to become despairing and discouraged and to just want to end the experience by their own hand. I think that's very unfortunate, but to be expected. And who knows, in the thousands of lives we have had, whether we have stepped into that particular mode of exit and relief. I do know that if that mode is chosen, the disciple in the next life will want to work at a furious pace to make up for the ill-considered event of taking one's own life in a recent previous incarnation. Now, an important point about who qualifies. This fourth stage is only possible to a disciple who has been an accepted disciple for more than one life and who has demonstrated his ability to work with selflessness and pertinacity. That's like a very concentrated form of persistence, pertinacity. So, sometimes DK said to a disciple, this is the fifth life in which you've been an accepted disciple. To others, he might say, this is your first life as an accepted disciple. Now, if we think we are an accepted disciple, for all the good reasons that he has given, do we think it's new to our experience, this stage of accepted discipleship, or do we think we've been at it for longer? Well, we'll find out. So the requirements of this fourth stage can be stated as follows. And of course, naturally, measure your own attainment as you see it against these requirements. The disciple has succeeded in decentralizing himself and is no longer the point of dramatic interest on his own little stage. Interesting, the fourth stage of abstraction is decentralization. You might begin with, you can't assign these things exclusively, but the discipline of the etheric physical, the dispassion of the astral, the discrimination of the mind, lower mind, and number 4, the decentralization of the personality. So it's interesting that decentralization is involved here in the very necessary process of taking the eyes so habitually focused off the little self. So the disciple is no longer the point of dramatic interest on his own little stage. He is no longer preoccupied with his feeling nature and the excessive self-interest evidenced by so many no longer controls his thought and aspiration. Okay, that's one important requirement for this stage. There can be, interest in the instrument, but DK is talking about excessive self-interest, whether obvious or in hiding, that is characteristic of so many. How large in scope is your self-interest? Is my self-interest? Well, the decentralization will come, and one way or another, there's no way to avoid it. If we are to somehow fulfill these 6 or 7 stages of discipleship. Then, number 2, the disciple can now work with personality, impersonality, no matter how his own personal nature may be reacting. That's an interesting split, isn't it? Certain aspects of your nature may be in a bit of an uproar, However, your perspective is such that you are not identified with that uproar, and you can observe it intelligently. And do the Buddhists call this mindfulness or right mindfulness? Or does the Tibetan call it the attitude of the observer, or at least a high instance of the attitude of the observer? Going on, this means that his own feelings, thoughts, likes, dislikes, and desires are no longer the controlling factors. That's a hard saying, in my view, and hard to achieve, in my view, anyway. Because it's very, very difficult to stand back from our own feelings and thoughts, our likes, and our dislikes, attractions, repulsions, and our desires. They're there, but they're not the controlling factor. Going on, he is conditioned in his daily activities and relationships only by those intentions and activities which are for the good of the group. He will not sacrifice any individual to the group good until after due effort to help that individual understand and demonstrate right relationship. You can see the Tibetan doing this all the time. But he will not hesitate to take firm action as needed, as need and opportunity arise. Well, all the time you can see Master DK attempting to instruct before expelling, and even the expulsions, if I'm thinking about it, were more non-inclusions in terms of a subsequent activity, such as movement from the groups of 9 that he was formulating to the new reorganized C group of 24. Some people just were not invited, but you can imagine that word leaked out, even though DK told the participants that they must use the utmost discretion and really keep quiet about the new effort. Otherwise, the human psyche, filled with envy and jealousy and the desire to advance, would take it all wrong and cause trouble. Yeah, so this is the big sentence here. How is he actuated? Not by all those feelings and not by those. Actuated by something else. By what's for the good of the group. So ask yourself, how you're doing on that actuation. Being activated only by those intentions and activities, which are for the good of the group and not to fulfill your selfish ambition. So far we've got decentralization, well, that's a horrible spelling. We got that one. And we've got impersonality. And now another. The disciple has developed a sense of proportion as to the work and the relative value, of his contribution to the master's work and the ashramic life. He is engrossed in the task and the opportunity, and not with the master and with his individual position in the master's thoughts. A sense of proportion. And certain things he has set aside that naturally beginners have not yet succeeded in setting aside. Most disciples in the early stages of their novitiate, they are novices, never forget that they are disciples. This is what the Master Morya called the smug recollection of the self-engrossed mind. It is a form of veiled pride, which beginners find it difficult to avoid. Never for a minute do they forget the fact of their discipleship, or the fact of the master, no matter how active their service. Master Morya so often really nails it, you know. He really says the thing directly. The smug recollection of the self-engrossed mind. Well, ask yourself. I ask myself. I sometimes think too much of being a disciple. I don't know what just happened here, but something happened. Which is probably not great. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I think the view has to be changed just a little. Well, this is not going to be so easy. I have some bigger screen in front of me, but anyway, the smug recollection of the self-engrossed mind, and never for a minute do they forget. Sorry. Okay, friends, sorry if that looks like it's got a bunch of hiccups in it. It probably does, because I'm kind of learning this program as I go, and important things disappear. But anyway, Master Moria's direct statements, thinking of our discipleship all the time and using it as a form of veiled pride, which beginners find it difficult to avoid. They don't forget for a minute that they are disciples, and they use that as an excuse, often, perhaps to escape other duties. Yet, says the Tibetan, if they were truly working from a point of tension, they would forget his, the master's, very existence in the work to be done for their fellow men. Well, ponder on that. It's always these little foibles, maybe this is not so little, foibles that come up and which we do not suspect. And there they are, presenting us with difficulty. Now, so far we have decentralization, we have impersonality, and how can I put it here? Let's see if I can do this. Engrossment with the task and not with the master. We'll put it that way. Also, how many more things do we have here? Well, a few. And it'll be a while before we can finish this one. I'd like to finish it before tonight's broadcast, but that won't be possible. I can already see. The Chela on the thread has reached a point where the higher correspondence to the so-called split personality is to be found. or to word it otherwise, where that state of consciousness of which the split personality is the shadow and distortion makes its appearance. Well, he's going to be able to look from the point of view of the soul, and at the same time he will be involved with the personality also, but from a distance. That's the point. Do you get immersed in the tar, as it were, or do you see what it does and stand back? So the disciple, to be a true Chela on the thread, is simultaneously aware of 2 points of concentrated activity. Okay, A, the point of spiritual tension, wherein he is focused and which he endeavors to preserve inviolate and constant. So that's number 1. He holds this high spiritual tension, if he can. And then number 2, the focused sphere of activity in the 3 worlds, through the medium of which he carries out his work and service as a disciple. So he's in 2 places at the same time. Whoop, it's not so good. There we go. 2 places at the same time. He's, as it were, within the ashram. If an accepted disciple is within the ashram, certainly a Chela on the thread is a little more progressed toward the center than the accepted disciple per se will be. And the focused sphere of activity in the 3 worlds, through the medium of which he carries out his work and service as a disciple, and trying, see if I can get that. Trying, gosh. To not pay overly much attention to his personality or to the individuality of the master. We can become, as we know, rather obsessed with the master and what we imagine the master's thinking of us, and all that leads to a kind of preoccupation which is not having the heart and soul aflame with the work to be done. Forget yourself, aid the work, or aid the plan. The work needs you. These two related points are not really two separated activities, except as they emerge in the consciousness of the disciple upon the physical plane and express his objective and his subjective life. They are incident to his having to work in time and space through the medium of a physical brain. So in this stage, there's no real way to avoid this split condition. But in fact, they are very interconnected. And the disciple may think of the two as separated because of the limitations of the physical brain, but in fact, there is no real separation here. The second point of focus, which is the area, the arena of service, should be, in reality, the externalization of the inner point of tension. Well, that's going to be another golden sentence that we really, really have to ponder. The second point of focus, the focus sphere of activity in the three worlds, through the medium of which he carries out his work and service as a disciple, should be, in reality, an externalization of what he sees and knows and has opened up to him from his inner point of tension, which we hope, all of us, is constantly being elevated, raised, as we progress. In these words, you have the key to the true science of discipleship, to the developing relation of the human center and the hierarchical. It concerns also the work of the Buddha and the Christ, as they represent the point of tension in Shambhala and in hierarchy. The Buddha represents the point of tension in Shambhala. Christ represents the point of tension in hierarchy. I really want to emphasize this very powerful issue here. In these words, you have the key to the true science of discipleship, to the developing relation of the human and the hierarchical. Because I can, put it in red. Even though it's not entirely shambolic or Mauryic or related to Master Moria. And it concerns also the Buddha and the Christ and their sphere of service as they represent 2 points of tension, one shambolic and the other hierarchical. Well, they are definitely expressing along the second ray line. The Buddha and the Christ. My therapy chair here is just giving me a little bit of trouble. So you'll see strange things appear in back, and they don't belong, but okay, we do our best. Most disciples are not working from a point of spiritual tension, but from a point of personality focus, a step forward, indeed, from that of the average unthinking person, but one to which they cling unduly long. And don't we all? Isn't that one of the great problems in our development of discipleship? We cling overly long to that which has appeared natural, comfortable, customary to us. Cling unduly long. As long as a man is focused in the personality, the point of spiritual tension will evade him. Think about that. Think about that. The necessary point of spiritual tension. So uncustomary in the beginning, so elusive in the beginning, and so surprising when it comes. He will be driven by personality aspiration, okay, and not by ashramic force. And this focus in form will lead to trouble, both to the individual aspirant and to his group. Well, I'll put a little something in here that represents the personality. And both the rose color and the lighter blue color are representing the astral body, which more or less is the center the most powerful elemental within the personality. But can we let go to that to which we cling unduly long? And are we, even now, evaded by the point of spiritual tension? I certainly know the difference when I'm able to achieve, I'll call it a pervasion or an infuception, or the result of be still and know that I am God, and just the average perceptions of a multitude of apparently differentiated things. We have to get beyond this artificial manyness into a oneness which does not destroy the myopic interactions of the manyness. In the myopic world, these things have to be dealt with, but something is added which completely unifies the manyness, and you begin to realize that all of that manyness comes out, arises from that essential or essentiality which pervades the manyness. Could we but realize it? And this whole work here that we're attempting is all about progressive states of revelation and realization. When stabilized, they become an initiation. We've entered into a new type of insight. We've gone in, and we are now acting within that new stage of insight. But spiritual tension, this is different. As a result of complete dedication of the personality to the service of humanity, big words, right? Complete dedication of the personality to the service of humanity stimulates and empowers, but does not evoke the lower life of the personal self. Well, there's something there that's really, really powerful. And, you know, we get an idea about it. Really powerful. And if we stand back and think about it, well, we will ask ourselves about the degree of complete dedication of the personality to the service of humanity. Probably we've gone through many phases of personality development, and it would be a rarity if all of those signaled a complete dedication of the personality to the service of humanity. But we know when we look at Master DK and other even higher masters, that that's where they are. That's what they have done. And they are living in a state of spiritual tension. Well, to think in those terms is already a very appreciable step forward. It is a high state. And you know, as you read along, you will discover certain sentences. I'm sharing the ones for myself, but certain sentences which jump out at you as really big explanations or occult hints. Read in that way, that the words the Master chooses through his amanuensis have a special power. And sometimes there are those summary sentences or paragraphs which really gather it all together. Suppose we could carry, even for one day in our consciousness, the sentence, spiritual tension arises because of complete dedication of the personality to the service of humanity. And there's that word complete. Since our lives are very patchy in a way, checkered, we have to go a long way before we get that complete dedication. From the moment you wake up in the morning till you go to sleep at night, and if we really had a mastery over it, our nightly activities would simply be a continuity of that complete dedication. These are the requirements which the disciple must meet before he is taught to react, or reach rather, the master at will and when emergency arises. So we'll just review those, and I want to make sure that I put down the right, gosh, that's a big period, isn't it? But I'm just going to leave it. So let's just say wielding. The higher correspondence to the split personality. We have uniting the point of spiritual tension and the field of service in the world. Maybe that's even easier to understand. Uniting the point of spiritual tension with the field of service in the world. Well, we've had a few requirements here, haven't we? To be a Chela on the thread. And every one of them could really be pondered. Decentralization, I'm paraphrasing, just, bringing the main point. Impersonality, engrossment in the task and not with the master, or presumably with the lives of other disciples, and with discipleship in general. And then working through that higher correspondence to the split personality, but doing it in such a way that there is a unification of the point of spiritual tension, which finally we have been able to achieve, with the field of service in the world. It's a hard path, isn't it? As DK says, the path of discipleship, not easy, but it has its compensations. I would like here to call your attention to the attitude of the master at this stage of the Chela's progress. As the name implies, the disciple at this point is permitted to call the attention of the master. Now, that permission and the method is given to him after he has proven some of these requirements that we just saw above, four of them. So he's permitted to call the master, call the attention. This is permissible only when the Chela can be trusted to use the privilege solely for purposes of group service and never for himself or for his own benefiting. Now we have to really understand that. Our periods of difficulty, danger, incapacitation, if their relief would be good for the group, allowed to call. This, well, I think the answer is coming. This signifies that the disciple is capable of handling his life and problems himself, and is not likely, therefore, to intrude his personal crises into the life of the ashram. I think we've been answered here. So the whole idea of self-reliance that the Buddha stressed is again repeated in another way. There is the greatest restraint on the part of the disciple when it comes to potentially distracting the master or taking his valuable time, although DK has said that this method of contact is actually not so demanding upon the master. It will release a certain energy, but it's not exactly like asking to set up an interview in the master's ashram. So calling the attention of the master, we can understand why the method is only given after there has been decentralization and impersonality, and just engrossment with the task and not so much interest in the personality of the master. The master doesn't really have a personality, and if it's possible to live from 2 points of view at once and make them a unity, the method will not be given, and thus the master, in a way, he protects his energy, which is needed for probably much more important things, and he protects the ashram. So it's unlikely then, as onerous as the personal crises may appear to the disciple, that he would say, Master, I'm having a problem. Can you help me with this problem? And of course, like I say, Alice Bailey was very heroic in that, inasmuch as she had real problems in the personality, the health issue, basically, toward the end, and she just wouldn't call upon the master. But of course, in my opinion, she stood at a still higher stage than that of Chela on the thread. Maybe Chela in the aura, possibly Chela within the master's heart, possibly that. But then, you know, in her case, the issue was a little bit complicated because she was working for DK as part of an agreement, I guess, though actually fundamentally working for Master KH. And from a certain point of view, we could look at Master DK as being in the Ray Ashram of Master KH. And so what else about that disciple? It implies also a Chela of such devotion and essential basic selflessness. See that devotion is also useful, even at high stages, that the ashram needs no protection from his vibratory activity. He never exacts from the master any of the potency which rebuffs, as it is esoterically called. The master knows that if a call comes from the Chela on the thread, it will not be a waste of time, of his time, to respond, because the call will always be launched on behalf of group need and for the establishing of group purpose. And then we do have to think, you know, always, maybe you've had the experience, if you feel affiliated, that from this line of thought, the ashram would need protection. At least it would be a distraction. It would be unfitting the line of thought which is occurring within me at the moment. I've had that experience, and it is subduing. It is humbling, and it forces you to really try to make the grade so that, in fact, you don't disrupt anything of higher value than the kind of intervention you might be calling for. And this is really important The master knows that if a call comes from the Chela on the thread, it will not be a waste of time for him to respond. The call will be always launched on behalf of group need and for the establishing of group purpose. So that word emergency, something which in an immediate way is coming forth right then and needs proper institution. That word emergency on behalf of group need or group purpose is the guide. One might be suffering various grievances within the personality. The question is, are they legitimate to release towards the master? If one were taught the method of doing so. And probably in many instances, the answer would be no. No matter what the master is doing, DK says, or what his preoccupation, he must respond to that call. For it is the endowed right, the Chela on the thread has been dowered with this right, of the trusted disciple to send it out when emergency demands it. Well, if that doesn't fill us with a sense of responsibility, just think of the important things the master may be doing, things about which we have no idea. And are we willing to intervene at that point because of our own personal emergency? Didn't he just say that we have to handle those things by ourselves? But when, for the sake of the group and its purpose, and for a real group need, a call is required, well, let us hope that, and trust that the disciple at that stage will have the necessary discrimination and the necessary discernment to know when he can call or not. Now, this is an interesting question. Next, you might ask how the Chela knows that he can get through to the master, using here a colloquialism. I can assure you, he says, that a complete inhibition rests upon him when the call may not be sounded. An inhibition arising on his side of the relationship and not imposed by the master, and he neither wants nor attempts to sound the call when there is a question in his mind. Well, we have to pass through this stage to have an experience of how it really is. And right now, most of us are learning, aren't we? So a complete inhibition rests upon him if there's any doubt, any question. So this really is connected with spiritual discernment, being able to detect what is the real case in this call that he might want to set up. But there are various occult methods by which the master does protect himself. It is even the intuition, okay. It is a matter of clear, intuitive perception, which obviously the Chela on the thread must be provided with to some degree. And, being on the thread, perhaps that parallel process of building the Antahkarana with its various threads has also made it possible for him to touch the intuition. It is a matter of clear, intuitive perception, the recognition of an unimpeded channel, as we've just read, the channel may be temporarily blocked, and an act of spiritual will. It is in reality the process of invocation on the part of the disciple, and he evokes response from the master. Clear, intuitive perception. The disciple will not sound such a call in case of doubt. And the disciple has already been, in a way, tested out, shall we say, because the method of sounding requires, as we have said, decentralization, impersonality, and concentration upon the task and not the master, and the unification of the two fields. One is aware that they are different in a way, but a unification occurs. The point of observation or higher point of tension and the field of service. This whole concept of the Chela on the thread lies behind the distorted teaching about the prerogatives and privileges of the priesthood. Apparently, the priesthood, being close enough to the divine sources, as to have the right to enter those sources, whereas others do not. So, of the priesthood and the relation of the Pope, for instance, to God, special relation, so it is thought, or in general of the elect to the deity. Now you can see the danger of pride entering in. There are the elect and the non-elect, and the elect can contact a deity. Well, it's all a reflection of the real thing. The latent and unfulfilled ideal is that of the Chela on the thread and the master and his ashram, interpreted by the ecclesiastical consciousness as the church. When the coming world religion is built around the work and activity of world disciples and knowers, then we shall see these symbols, called the rights and prerogatives of the priesthood, truly correctly interpreted and truly expressed. The same inference are also to be seen, inferences, in the Brahmin caste in India. So one day, the real thing will take the place of the reflection. Now, I mean, there are so many things, even, in Masonry. Let's just say it's the story of initiation, but it is a reflection of that, symbolic reflection. And yet, not yet anyway, is it the real thing. One day it will be. Masonic initiations will be true initiations. And so for the church, and so for the banded esoteric organisms. But right now, we deal with a little bit of what we might call a pale image of the true process. So, what have we? Okay, I got it. The responsive relationship, this responsive relationship and interplay is only attained after a long cycle of the outer relation of the accepted disciple upon the periphery and finally within the ashram. Basically, that is the idea that at least one life must pass before, as an accepted disciple, before it becomes possible to become a Chela on the thread. He calls it a long cycle. Well, maybe it's usually more than one life having to pass. Possible. Now, this stage, it does not come about as the result of any efforts to fit oneself for this position of power and of influence in service. It is simply the silent and almost unconsciously achieved result of that self-effacement and self-forgetfulness which distinguishes the accepted disciple, if truly the accepted disciple. He is decentralized and engrossed in the fulfillment of the divine plan to the best of his ability, and those are the first two requirements. This stage is the reward, if I might so express it, of the worker who knows what he has come into incarnation to do, and who is endeavoring with dedication to do it. The driving urge of his life is the need of humanity and his expanding awareness of the immediate next step that man must take. Well, friends, I've got this other program coming up before long. So here are the first two. I'm going to bring that in. And he is decentralized and engrossed in the fulfillment of the divine plan to the point of self-forgetfulness and even forgetfulness of the master, with whom so many beginners are obsessed, and the reward of knowing what the incarnation is for and doing it. Of this stage and this type, the driving urge for his life is the need of humanity and the expanding awareness of the immediate next step, which that man must take. So this is a generalization. It's not just about the individual himself. No, it's more. Well, I'll tell you what, I have no idea what the timing is because in a way I've had to get up and down and so forth. But I will, we are on page 747, and I think, let's get back there, that we began on page 741. So this goes as far as 747. Today is the 16th of June. And I'm going to copy this below. And we've then accomplished a little bit with program 18. I think it's probably safer for me to go ahead with a new program rather than try to go through all of that that has to do with the broadcast and the resuscitation of it. Now let's see, what have I got here? Okay, and this word to initiation is not needed. So we're on page 747, and we'll begin there. I always make an idealistic promise that, gosh, somehow after the broadcast, I'll be able to forge ahead, but let's just wait and see. This is the end of program 18, 6 Stages of Discipleship section, and we're on the 16th of June, and we've worked from 741 to 747, and we'll see. The next one will be page 747 up to whatever we reach. Okay, friends. Every day I'm more impressed, more sensitive to, more appreciative of what the Tibetan has given. It becomes sometimes astonishing to me, the depth of detail and organization and the clarity of it. So I hope you find in your heart and mind the way to respond to his words with those types of evaluations. As for my words, I try to be a little bit helpful and tie things together, you know. That's what I do, I think. I make links to other related points of importance and of interest. So Tuya and I wish you lots of love and many blessings, and the whole communications group the same. And let us persist. 4 years, a little less now, before the era of the forerunner concludes, and the great offering that will be the third installment begins to make its way towards us. Okay, we'll see you before long now. Bye-bye.